Hi everyone, welcome to the Creatives Across Borders podcast with your host Bio. The children's media space is like an onion, with layers of opportunities for different creatives to tap into. In this episode, I'm joined by Jasmine Richards, author and founder of Storymix, who unpacks the art and business of book packaging. 5 years into Storymix, Jasmine shares her journey from humble beginnings, co-authoring the flagship series Aziza's Secret Fairy Door with Tola Okogwu, to navigating the challenges and seizing opportunities in an ever-evolving industry. Jasmine also dives into the exciting world of IP and book optioning, offering invaluable insights. With nearly 20 years of experience in children's publishing across key roles, her expertise and business savvy shine through in this must-listen interview. Tune in for an educational and inspiring conversation.
And we are live. Yes, so good to have you, Jasmine. Thanks for making our time to have this conversation with me. It's been a long time coming. Yeah, so pleasure to have you again.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for asking me on.
Cool. So let's start with your background. Tell us about Jasmine Richards. What's your background? How would you describe yourself?
Oh, do you mean in terms of career or the whole thing? Because I mean, how long have you got?
Yeah. So just give us a summary, because my follow-up question is about your roles. Because I know that you straddle multiple worlds. So
Yes,
there's Jasmine, the author. Yeah, there's the author, and then it's Jasmine, the founder of Storymix Studio. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Jasmine. I've worked in kids publishing for coming up to 20 years now, and I've had several roles in the industry. So working as an editor, working as a packager, as an author, did an English degree. So it kind of felt in some ways quite inevitable that I'd end up in publishing. So I've always loved reading and storytelling. And I don't know, I don't have that many hobbies. It's all about books. So I'm either writing books or I'm reading books or I'm editing books. That's the easiest way to sort of explain what I'm about, really.
Okay, interesting. So in terms of your roles, because I think this would help us know you even better. So tell us about Jasmine, the author, and Jasmine, the founder of Storymix.
Okay. So I've probably written more than 15 books now. Some of those books are under my name. We can get into this a little bit more. Some of these books are under my name. Some of these books are under a pen name. Some of these books I've written whilst I've been in the employment of publishers. But I've probably, well over 15 books now. My first book came out in 2012. So quite a long time ago now. And I would say my sweet spot when I'm writing as Jasmine is middle grade. So I really love sort of fantasy adventure. I love magic. I love mythology. I really like the reimagining of sort of established mythologies. I like kind of mashing up all of those different sort of themes. So my most recent novel is called Keeper of Myths. That's published by UClan. And the books that have most recently come out in the UK are actually updated versions of books that were published by HarperCollins in the US a few years ago, because I had this quite strange situation where I was being published in the States and not in the UK. So I was having this whole career on the other side of the pond and not on this side of the pond. But those books are finally in the UK, which is super exciting. So those are the books under my name, but I've also written on series like Beast Quest, written several books in that series. I've done quite a few educational books. So for Big Cat, like phonically decodable books, things like that. I've written picture books. I've written YA. I've written a sort of gothic horror YA called Oliver Twisted. That was for Egmont, who are now called Farshawe. I've done lots.
Interesting. So how about Jasmine, the founder of Storymix, though? Tell us about that. Tell us about that, Jasmine. So
if you think I started in publishing, after university. So we're talking about like 2003, 2004. I had got my first job, and that was as a graduate trainee at Penguin.
Mhm.
And after I left Penguin, I went to work for a company called Working Partners, who are a book packager. And when we use the phrase book packager, what we're talking about is a company which comes up with ideas in-house. So they'll come up with the characters, they'll come up with the story world, they'll come up with the plot, and then they'll commission writers to put meat on the bone. Okay, so that's where I learned how to be a book packager. It was at that company called Working Partners. Then I went to work for a company called Oxford University Press Children's, where I again ended up packaging, but in-house this time. So we would come up with ideas in-house and then commission those writers. So all of that is to say that I love plotting. I love coming up with characters. I love coming up with story worlds. I do that as an author, but I also do it as a book packager. And it was in 2018, I was in the bookshop with my 5-year-old son, and I was looking at the shelves in that 5 to 8 section. And actually a lot of the books on that shelf I'd either written or edited. But what I couldn't see was a book that featured a character that looked like my son. So I had this real moment. It was kind of like this quite a rageful moment, actually. And I wasn't just angry at the industry, although don't get me wrong, I was also angry at the industry for letting my son down. It felt like by not representing him, but also myself, because I'd worked in the industry at this point for 5 years, not 5 years, 15 years, right?
Wow.
And thinking, well, how could I have been a part of this problem, and how am I going to fix it? How am I going to fix this as quickly as possible? Then it occurred to me that maybe I should become a full-time writer, author, but I know I'm not a very fast writer. So I'll maybe write 1 middle grade novel a year. Or I could take all of the knowledge that I'd learned book packaging over the last 15 years or so and start my own company, start my own business, which would really intentionally focus on creating series fiction that centered Black kids and brown kids. So putting them in the center of the action, and then also using this packaging model to offer and create opportunities for writers and illustrators of color. So I was like, okay, so that is what I'm going to do to change this bookshelf. I'm going to start my own packager, because I knew from experience that when you create series fiction, you're not just creating one book, you may be creating 5 books in the series or 3 books in the series. So we're literally going to take up inches on the bookshelf. And that was that was where I started with the business. I was thinking, right, I'm going to change this. I'm going to change it quickly. So that's how that happened.
Oh, interesting. So, but how do you straddle both worlds, though? Because again, you just mentioned, I mean, the books that you write are in the hundreds of pages. I mean, I have a few of them here. Yeah. And then, you know, you also, it's time consuming to write those, but then you also manage the business. How do you do it then? How do you straddle both worlds?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really, if I'm honest, in terms of my own writing, my personal writing that I do as Jasmine, I don't. I can do shorter books. So if I get approached to write like an educational phonically decodable book, I can manage that. Could I write a middle grade or a YA novel where I am right now? No. But I kind of feel like writing and creating is all about seasons. And this season right now is about building this business. It's about building Storymix. And I get to scratch the creative itch, if you like, with the business. And my favorite bit of the whole process is coming up with the idea. Actually sitting my butt in the chair and writing 70,000 words is not my favorite bit. Okay. So the fact that in my business, I get to have an idea and then I get to collaborate with other people to grow that seed of that idea into something else. But I'm not actually physically writing those books. I'm not doing that. That's not my job. My job is to strategically lead the business. My job is to pitch the projects to publishers and try and get the best possible deal for the writer that we're working with. I mean, and that's where I get all of my energy from at the moment. But I'm also there right at the beginning of the process when we're coming up with the ideas for these books. So I feel quite satisfied in terms of my creative life. But I think down the line and in a different season, I probably will return to writing novels. I'm sure that will happen, but it's not for now.
Okay. But I want to walk back to that season in your life though when
Yeah.
you wrote? Because I was looking at, so your books with Tola Okogwu, and because I don't know what it's like to collaborate with someone on writing a book. So
Yes.
so you write as a pen name called Lola Morayo, and you've also done the same thing for a book where you're called JD Sharp, I think.
Yeah, JD Sharp is a book that's the Oliver Twisted. That's the YA Gothic novel, which I wrote in 2011.
Okay.
So a long time ago. Whereas with Aziza and the book that I did with Tola, that kind of straddled those two worlds of being author and the founder of Storymix. So Aziza was the first project that came out of my production house, out of this fiction studio. So I was still working out the model of what that looked like. With Aziza, Tola and I collaborated with that. But as we've gone on and as Storymix has gone on, it's become much more distinct. My role as the founder of the business and the writer who writes the books, like those two things are more separate. Whereas in the beginning, because it was just me in the business, and it was literally just me trying to start a thing, I did everything. I was in the middle of so many different projects and different processes in the business. Whereas 5 years in, I'm trying to sit more like this over the top rather than this in the center. Because again, if we're going to sort of talk about seasons and all of these things, like I want to stay in the business of book packaging. And if I'm at the center of every single project and every single process, then I'm going to burn out.
Yeah, true that.
So I had to be able to let go and let other people in. And I'm so lucky. Like my team at Storymix are phenomenal, right? So don't get me wrong, there's a bit of grief about being further away from the books. Like I said, I'm at the beginning bit where we're coming up with ideas, and then I come in towards the end and I pitch the projects. That whole bit in the middle, that editorial process, is not so much my domain anymore. But I have such a wonderful team, and the writers that we work with get to work with such wonderful editors. I'm very proud that I've built a business that allows that to happen, Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. But going back to that collaborative writing process with Tola, how does it work? How do you co-write a fiction book with another author? How does that work? Can you just talk us through that process for those of us who don't even know what it's like?
Yeah, so I mean, it took lots from the book packaging model, which has been around since the 1950s and Nancy Drew. So co-writers do it differently. The way Tola and I did it is I would do the storyline, right? So the plot beats. Tola would do the next draft of that, and then I would go in and polish. So that's how we work together on Aziza. And like sometimes the order of that might change a little bit. That's roughly how it worked.
Do you not have any point where there's a conflict of, ideas or plots? Does that ever occur, or you just have this synergy where everything goes smoothly?
Yeah, I think because Aziza was the first project coming out of Storymix, and that the IP, or if you like, the intellectual property, came out of Storymix. So the way I always explain it to writers that I work with in this way is it's the difference between being the nanny, right, and the parent. And in both of those situations, the baby needs to be looked after and loved, right? If that doesn't happen, there's a problem. But the relationship is different. The relationship that a nanny has, I'm not talking about grandma nanny, I'm talking about the role, the job of being a nanny, and a parent is different. But they're both, in both of those roles, you're looking after the baby. So with Aziza's Secret Fairy Door, Tola's role is more to be the nanny of that project, right? So, and she was always really respectful of like the plot that I had created. That doesn't mean she didn't push back and say, oh, I'm not sure about this. I think we should tweak this. But overall, she's like, okay, like this is your baby. This is your first project that's coming out of Storymix. I'm going to support you in doing this. We're going to make a really great project together. But sort of the understanding that the character and the world is something that had come out of this production company, that had come out of Storymix. Now, if me and Tola, Jasmine, author, Tola, author, came up with something together, that would look different, right? Because it's not coming out of a production company, it's coming out of two authors working together. And I don't know what that looks like because I haven't done that before.
Okay.
But Tola, if you're watching this, I'm up for it, babes, as you well know.
Nice. Okay. Thanks for answering that. Yeah. So my next question, I will just share some context. So, I mean, when I got started in the industry, and I'm still fairly new, and interestingly, that's how I met you, because it was in the process of trying to learn about the industry that I came across a book signing session or something like that you had in London. And so I'm still learning. So when I got started, I had unrealistic expectations. I mean, I didn't know as a then, I had, expectations as to what an advance payment was with traditional authors, not to mention the process of even finding one, via an agent and all that. So I'm sure there are people out there like myself, right? And so for someone like you who's been there and done that in the publishing space, can you talk us through how the industry works here in the UK?
That's such a big question. How does it work? So obviously you have traditional publishing, and you have sort of more independent publishing or self-publishing. Okay, and those two models are quite different. My expertise is in traditional publishing, and what I mean by traditional publishing is you're a writer, you've written a book, and you find an agent. The agent goes and pitches your book to the publisher, and the publisher's like, yes, please. And when the publisher is saying yes, they're saying yes to buying the license, buying the license to your book. So they're getting the exclusive right to publish your book. And I think where there is confusion sometimes and heartache is when you're selling the license to your book, you are also selling or you're signing over some of your rights in terms of what that cover of that book might look like. Now, a good publisher will always inform, collaborate, and sometimes ask for the point of view of the author, okay? Because they want that author to be happy with that cover. But let's not be mistaken, the publisher has paid the author for the license to publish this book, and so they've assigned the rights to working out what that package looks like to the publisher, right? If an author doesn't want to sign over the rights for that, then they should self-publish. And that is me being this is me being the most basic and straightforward way about it. But sometimes I think authors are like, oh, I wanted the cover to be exactly like this. And they had the cover, and they've drawn the cover, and they've commissioned their friend, but they've sold their license to a traditional publisher. That's just not what this business transaction is, right? Okay. You've sold the license to your book to a publisher because you believe that they know how to bring that book to market, right? So now I've sort of rush through some of those stages, like to find an agent. That's a whole we could do a whole hour chat on how you find an agent. But with traditional publishing, that does tend to be the path, is that the writer has written something and they've managed to find an agent who is like, yep, I'm going to go on this journey with you, I'm going to represent you, I'm going to pitch this book, and if I sell it, I'm going to get 20% of whatever you get, because that's what a agent normally asks for. It used to be 15%, we're at about 20% now. And the fact is for an agent, because if any agent comes to you and is like, you need to give me money up front to represent your book, you need to be running in the other direction. That's a scam. Right?
Interesting.
I keep on leaning off to one side. That's not how it is. The agent is saying they're going to represent you because they believe in the book, they believe in you as a writer, and they believe they can sell it. Okay? So the agent is doing that work up front, might be doing work with you editorially up front, go all the work to pitch the book, and they're hoping just as much as the author is that that's going to sell, because that agent has done a lot of work, as has the author. So that's why it's so hard to get an agent, because an agent has to think really carefully about how many clients they take on and the likelihood of selling that book, right? So that's how that works. That's how that works. And the agent is there to advise you, is there to help you plan a career, all of those things. It should be it's a business relationship. It's not a friendship. It's a business relationship. But you want to have an agent that gets what you're about and loves your writing, because it can be a very, very long process.
So I have a follow-up question to that, which is around, I mean, I've often heard people say that working with traditional publishers, you know, they go through this period or this process where the story goes through certain changes, and so it takes a different shape or form from what they had initially, you know, conceived. Is that part of the whole? Is that what you give away when they buy that license from you? Because I don't know if, I mean, well, I wouldn't know that. So
yeah. So, you know, if you're in the enviable position of you've got more than one publisher interested in your book, then that is where you would sort of sit down with either of those editors and say, what is your vision for this book, right? And what you're listening for is, do they get what the heart of this idea is? What I'm trying to do? Because some authors, some publishers might see a book and go, love this book. I think it's a horror book, right? Because I know that there's a huge gap in the market for horror for 9 to 12-year-olds. And you, the writer, might think there are spooky elements in this story, right? There's a ghost in this story. But actually, this is a story about family and grief. And that's what I want to explore. You can see that there is a disconnect there. There's potential problems down the road. Okay, so what you'd hope is you're in a situation where you have 3 or 4 publishers who are talking to you, and one publisher is like, I love the way you've discussed grief in this novel. There's not enough books talking about grief for 9 to 12-year-olds, because reading is a way for children to learn and develop empathy. And then you have this other publisher that's like, there's a huge gap in horror. Even if this publisher over here who's talking about the horror offered more money, if that was me, I'd be going with this publisher over here because they get what my book is about. Of course, it's personal choice. But if you choose to go with this publisher over here who's told you, I'm going to position this as a horror for 9 to 12, when you've wanted to write a story about grief, then you need to understand that you've made a choice to go down this road, right? So now you're not always in a situation where you have more than one publisher, right? But that's why it's so important to meet your potential acquiring editor to find out what they're about. And then you've just got to listen. You've got to really listen and understand and think, is this the partner? Is this the right partner for this book? Do I want to assign the license to my book to this publishing house who are going to position it in this way? And sometimes the desire to be published is more powerful than that voice saying, I'm not sure if this is the right fit, right? But you've got to go in with your eyes open. And certainly through the editorial process, books do shift and change, right? But if you've had the honest conversation at the beginning to understand what the vision is from the editor, then there shouldn't be surprises. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, that answers my question. So it's something, so you can actually manage your expectations with respect to things like that then. Because I was also going to ask you if those are things that are spelled out in whatever contract that's signed, you know, are they explicitly spelled out, or those are just conversations you have and then, you know, that's it?
Yeah, so in the contract, you might have something that is sort of a line around delivery and acceptance. So this is another one that authors don't really know until they've done it a couple of times.
Okay.
So when you get paid by a publisher, you get paid in 3 or sometimes 4 installments. You get paid on signature of the contract, delivery and acceptance of the manuscript, publication of the manuscript. Okay, that middle stage, delivery and acceptance, is really important, because the author might think, I've written my first draft, I've sent it to the publisher, now I'm going to get paid my 1/3 of the fee, or it's called the advance, that has been agreed. And we can talk a bit about what an advance is, why it's even called an advance, all of that stuff. But it's not just on delivery. It's on delivery and acceptance. And what acceptance means is that it's ready to go off to be copy edited, and the editor doesn't really think there's much more to do structurally. And I mean, when I was in-house, I think my record was doing 9 drafts, 9 rounds of edits on a manuscript until I felt like it was ready to go, because there was a lot of work to do, right? So the author will not get that chunk until it has been accepted by the editor and gone off to be copy edited.
Okay. So just to be clear, so in your instance, I mean, so 9 drafts or 9 changes, would that mean would that mean you reaching out to that writer would that be 9 times of editing for that writer also?
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Yeah.
So there's the back and forth until
So it'd be like, right, the manuscripts come, I read it, I might do comments in the manuscript and an editorial letter. It goes back. The author maybe made some changes, hasn't quite grasped everything that I've been trying to get across. Or sometimes there's so much work to do, you don't tell them all in the first round because they'll just be weeping in the corner. So you choose your battles, you do it in stages, because it's a layering process. Yeah.
Oh wow. And do they get to push back?
Of course.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they get to push back. My rule of thumb was is at the end of the day, if the author's name is on the cover of the book, I will ask them 3 times to change something. I will explain my reasons why, and I'd hope that they'd be trust enough. Because trust me, if I'm asking 3 times for something to be changed, I feel very strongly it needs to be changed, right?
Yeah,
and
true.
You've got to assume I'm an expert in what I do. You'd hope you would believe that, right? But if I asked them 3 times and they wouldn't change it, at the end of the day, this was just my philosophy as an editor. Not every editor will be the same, but my philosophy is, at the end of the day, it's your name on the book. So I'd say 3 times I will ask, and I'll push hard. If they say no 3 times, I would leave it. I didn't tell them that it was a 3 strikes and it was out situation, because normally by the 2nd or 3rd time, it's like, oh, wow, Jasmine, you feel this really strongly. I'm like, I do, because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm really worried that if you do X, Y, and Z, it means X, Y, and Z for your book, which might mean this for bit, and then it's a conversation. But if they really were like, no, this needs to stay, unless it was libelous or defamation, and it's something which is going to get the publisher sued, I'd let them keep it.
Okay. So now I can see why, because I was talking to someone the other day and she was like, yeah, she's been working with this publisher and I think her book is in the 2nd year. So now I can see why, it's not a 3 months process. It's not self-publishing a book. I could do it in maybe 2 months or 3 months. I can see why this takes a longer period.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. But then also, it's not just the editorial, it's also the selling cycle. So publishers will maybe go and talk to Waterstones every 6 months. Okay, so there's kind of other books before your books that need to be pitched. Like there's a cycle, and you might want to send out advanced readers copies or bound proofs a year before publication to start getting buzz going. So there's all of these things that happen, which means it's sort of an 18-month lead time normally. Wow. If there's illustrations, often you won't brief the illustrations until the whole book is finished, it's been copy edited, so it can be laid out on page, and there's not going to be changes to text. So yeah, all of that can take time.
I feel like this is a good time to talk about processes also. Things like advance payment. So yes. If I'm sitting down, 18 months, my book is not out yet. So my guess is that that's something that my advance sort of covers, that period of time where literally not earning any money or doing anything if I don't have anything else.
That's why it's called an advance. It's an advance on future earnings. So you're getting paid on signature of contract. So you haven't delivered the book yet. You've signed the contract. You're getting 1/3 there. You're getting 1/3 on delivery and acceptance of the manuscript, and then you get your last third on publication. So you are getting paid in that period in the run up to publication.
But I've also heard that with some people, it's not, they don't sign you up for one book. You know, you have to deliver on a series, if that makes sense. So how, I mean, is it even possible to get signed up to do one book? Or I don't know, what's it like in the industry? Is it
you can be signed up. You can be signed up to do one book, but I mean, I would argue that as an author, you probably want to be signed up for two, right? Because on signature of that contract, you're getting your signature advance for book 1 and book 2. Yeah, you're not just getting it for the book 1, because it's the contract. If the contract's for 2 books, you'll get the signature advance for 2 books. If it's for 4 books, you're getting the signature advance for all 4 books up front. And then also, I always say to authors and illustrators, you've got to see yourself as mini businesses, right? So if you're signing up more than one book, you can actually plan out your next 2 years and you can anticipate when you're going to get paid. Whereas if you just sell one book, you're going to have to then start all over again in terms of selling another book. And it's about cash flow, isn't it? To stay in the game. That's, again, my opinion. You know, some authors might feel like, oh, I don't want to have to commit to this publisher. I want to work with this publisher first, see if I like them before I commit to 2 books or 4 books. But then you understand, and that one book finishes, then you're sort of starting again in terms of negotiation, and there will be a gap. There'll be a gap. Whereas if they've required 2 books, they're like, right, book 1 is coming out September 24, book 2 is coming out September 25. They've commissioned it in September 2022, right? Because that's how long the process takes.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk about Storymix again now. So what's the difference between Storymix and working directly with a publisher, like a traditional publisher in the sense? Yeah.
So I think I touched on it earlier, but we're a book packager, and there's not many book packagers in the UK. There's more in the US. So some of the best known packager in the US is a company called Alloy Entertainment, and they're behind projects like Gossip Girl, Vampire Diaries. And I would say packagers are in that kind of in-between space. There's features of them that are like an agent, right? There's features of them, if you were going to look at film and TV, it's more like a production company. There's features of them that are a creator in their own right? So what we do at Storymix is very creative. Like, we spend a lot of time developing ideas in-house together. So it's almost like running it like a writer's room. So we might go, do you remember I was saying, oh, we know that horror is a trend for 9 to 12-year-olds. I might go to a big book fair like Bologna, come back and go, do you know what? Everyone was asking me for horror. Okay, if we were going to do horror, what does that look like through a Storymix lens? And our lens is about centering Black and brown kids in stories, right? Uncovering histories that we maybe haven't seen. Like, there's all of these things that are sort of our special sauce. I'm not going to tell you all of them, otherwise it won't be special secret sauce anymore. But there's things that we do very well, okay? So I'll come back and go, right, horror is going to be a trend. I'm still guessing, it's a punt, but that's based on 15, 20 years experience in the industry and what I'm hearing at the book fair. So we'll sit in a room and we'll just bounce ideas around with each other, saying, okay, who would the characters be? What is the plot? What is the hook? What is the peg? The hook is sort of like your strap line that's going to sort of bring people in. The peg is why now, right? Okay. So like, let's say it's a new king being crowned. Could, like that, if we knew that we could come up with an idea that was horror attached to a coronation that would come out at that same time, that would be a peg, right?
Oh, anyway, okay.
Right? Peg and a hook. We think about all of those things, then we'll storyline it, and then we're like, okay, so which writer could we work with who's going to take this really great idea and make it extraordinary, right? Make it really, really special. Then we might go out to agents and say, we have this idea. It might be someone that I met at a conference or at book signing. I meet writers in all kinds of places, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the same for other people in my team. So the whole idea is we've got our ear to the ground and we're looking for talent to help us bring these story ideas to life. So if you were working directly with a publisher, you'd be going with your own concept, an idea that you had ideated yourself, your own characters, your own story world, and you would have written that yourself and probably done self-editing. Whereas with us, we've come up with the concept, we find the writer, so we're packaging it up, right? We found the writer, we've worked editorially with that writer, and we have excellent editors in our company. So we'll work very hard with that writer to get it to be absolutely as strong as it can be. And that's when we go out to market.
Interesting. So Jasmine, is your work limited to just writing? Because I remember when we first met, you know, when you were enlightening me about other licenses tied to just not just writing. So you talked about licensing from a language point of view. If you were, I don't know, translating your book to multiple languages, you talked about things like, if I remember correctly, even things like fairs, you know, I don't know, pop-ups, you know, cartoons, TV, different media. So with Storymix, you know, do you go? So if you come up with a concept for a book or a story, how far do you go with that in terms of medium? Yeah.
So in terms of the translation rights, for most book packages, that is the engine to their business, is that they've created a series and they sell it in the UK and they sell it in the US and they sell it in Germany and they'll sell it in Spain. They sell the same thing many, many times over. Okay. So sometimes Storymix will sell the license to our projects, and sell world rights to a publisher, and then that publisher will go to all those different territories and sort of sell it on our behalf. Or sometimes we retain those rights and try and pitch it ourselves. So it kind of depends on the project, as to which route we go. In terms of film and TV, or maybe theatre rights or toys and merchandising, what you're really hoping is going to happen is that a production company or streamer will come along and say, we read your book, we loved it, can we please option the film and TV rights and the merchandising rights for your book? And an option is an option to turn it into a film or a TV series, right? So it's not a commission, it's not a green light, it's an option. And then you go, yes, and that option might be for 12 months, 18 months. And there's normally a clause in there that allows them to renew as well. And in that time, the streamer or the channel or the production company will be working up maybe a spec script, other materials that they will be trying to pull together so that they can pitch it and sell it and give it the green light. So you get a little bit of money. I think people would be surprised to know how little you get with an option. Where you actually make money, and where an author who had sold their license or Storymix who has sold our license, where you make money is if it's been greenlit and actually gets on screen.
Okay.
And that hasn't happened yet for us, so I can't tell you.
Okay. Because I was wondering from an independent, say, toy maker point of view, for example, I mean, if I saw, say, potential in a story and I had the capacity to bring that story alive in a different form, say an app, for example, what would it take to then get that option from Storymix? Because I would be covering the production cost, right? So what would that take? What would that normally entail? Do you also look at that person or that company and say, oh, we don't think the right fit, or we think they're right fit because of X, Y, and Z? Yeah,
that's true. That second one you said.
Okay.
Because we kind of want to see, whether they've got a proven track record.
You don't want people experimenting with your stuff, right?
And we want to see if their ethos is the same as ours. So, I've definitely had such frank conversations where I'm like, okay, you could option this project. There's some red lines for us here. my main character in this book is a young black boy. He needs to remain a young black boy, right? And I might even go a bit more detail and say, he's maybe not hyper masculine. He's really sensitive and all of these things, because that was important to me, that we show black boys in that space. So if I'm going to option this project, if I'm going to give the option to this project, do you understand that that's like part of the sort of DNA of this project? And if they're like, no, we're going to make him like this and this, I would say no. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Because to be fair, the option fee as well isn't such a huge amount of money that it's like, oh, this is, I can definitely stick to my morals and ideals here for the amount people will offer for option.
Okay.
So yeah.
No, I was going to ask you, so because we've seen books made into films, and I was just wondering, so the likes of, say, just use Disney as an example.
Yeah.
So if Disney wanted to get Aziza's Secret Fairy door out in film, would that be the same process also? Would they be optioning it? Is that still the same thing?
Yeah. They would start with an option. It would start, so Disney would come, they would option it. They might find, if they wanted to do it as a TV series, they might find a head writer or showrunner who would sit down, build out a treatment, which is like a really big document that talks about the world and the characters. They would do a script for the first episode, for the pilot episode. They might shoot a pilot episode, right? They might do all of this stuff to say, okay, and then they're going to go, right. Well, Disney's a bad example because they would just put it on their own channel. But let's say it's a production company. They might say, look, we've got script for the first 3 episodes. We've shot like a really rough pilot or the first 5 minutes. Hello, Netflix. Would you like to buy this? And then that's a yes or a no, right? And if it's a yes, then we go from an option to a green light, and then more payment happen.
Okay, so that makes more sense to me now. Okay, it's a bit more context. Well, thank you very much. I mean, and that's possibly in the pipeline for you, even though it hasn't happened yet, right? I mean, you're open to that, right? Because okay, I was also going to ask from the point of view of because I had asked you about the difference between Storymix and working directly with the publisher, and something crossed my mind with respect to the writer. You do also find the illustrator, right?
Yeah, on some projects, and we're doing that more and more. So we've just launched Story Inc., which is our new strand of our business, which is picture-led storytelling, from picture book all the way up to teen, so graphic novels as well. So we are now working directly with illustrators to work up concepts. But the lion's share of what we do is working with writers.
Okay. So, but in this case, say, because if I was working directly with the publisher, then things like my payments and all that would come directly from them. In your case, Storymix is like I don't know if the word is a middleman, because I mean you're getting the writers or illustrators on board. I don't know if you qualify as a middleman.
So Storymix has the contract with the publisher. The writer has the contract with Storymix, because we're commissioning the writer. The publisher is buying the license from Storymix.
Okay. So there's a lot of risk on you then, though, because by commissioning the writer, you're paying in advance and all that to that writer, right?
Yes, and So our risk happens earlier on in the process, actually. Like once we've got a publisher that is saying yes, they want to buy the project, and they're saying, let's say we're going to buy this project, we're going to pay you £10,000, right? And I've already agreed with the writer over here, right? Whatever we get offered by the publisher, it's going to be a 50-50 split. Like this, if it's a sort of YA middle grade novel, it's 50-50 split. So they've offered us 10, we keep 5, you get 5. That's how it is. So the license is Storymix, but it's a profit share. But what's happened before that point is when we're sending out our material, our sample material, so we don't get the whole book written, we might get the first third of the book written. Storymix has paid the writer and illustrator to create the text and the illustrations, and we've spent a lot of time editing and art directing that work. And then there's all the work that's gone into the storylining. So our storylines are extensive. Okay, it's not a one-page document saying write a book about a fairy. It's a document which says in chapter 1 this happens, in chapter 2 this happens, in chapter 3 this happens, and then it's sort of character profiles. That's all time. That's all cost as well. So yeah, so our risk actually happens much earlier on. Once it's a yes from a publisher, that's not risk anymore, because if the publisher's not offering enough money, we won't do it. If we can't do it in a way that means that the writer is going to be remunerated in a way that they feel comfortable with, and we do, then we won't do it.
Okay, well, I was just thinking, how much of this is built on the back of your relationship or your experience in the industry? Because I don't know how to talk to any publisher. I don't know anyone from anywhere, so, but how much of this is built on that experience, that wealth of experience that you've had in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's a really well-observed question, in that, I've worked in publishing for a long time. So a lot of the editorial directors or publishers who are acquiring and are in positions to acquire are people that I started with, right? So there's trust there, because clearly I know how to edit. So certainly in the early days, I know how to edit, I know how to write. If the writer for any reason couldn't come through, I would just do it. So one, there's reputation and experience, but also I think it was the fact that I'm a writer as well as an editor, which is like, okay, if this all goes southwards, I will just write you this thing. I'll write it. And it's like, okay, well, we know you can write, we know you can edit, we know that you understand publishing. So I think someone coming just fresh out the gate, hadn't had publishing experience, would probably find it quite hard to start a packager. I think you could probably be an agent, but I think you'd find it quite hard to start as a packager. That's not to say it couldn't happen, but yeah, it'd be harder for sure. Yeah.
Interesting though. I mean, because just thinking about it, because I'm thinking your job is also to sort of look out for trends, because you talked about, finding certain gaps in the market and then writing, how do you, besides just, looking out for trends, do you have like focus groups? Do you have regular meetings with, I don't know, publishers or because I would imagine that you're constantly having conversations to know what's going on, what they're asking for, or do they just come to you and say, hey, Jasmine, we're searching for X, Y, and Z? How does that work?
I wish they would do that second one more, but that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen so much. It really doesn't. I really want that. I would love that. I would love someone to say, we want a series about magic kittens. Storymix, can you please do us a story about magic kittens? But
why is that not happening though?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Instead, it's the first one, which is much harder, which is, yes, I have conversations with people. You're reading the trade magazines. You're just looking at cultural trends. And really often I'll wake up in the middle of the night and go, this is what we should do next. This is the thing. And then I'll go in. And then if my colleagues are vibing with that idea, or if they've thought of something and the rest of us are vibing, then we'll explore it. But I really wish publishers would just come and say, we want a Magic Kitten series. That would be much more straightforward.
But here's the thing. So, I see this thing where agents put out call for submissions.
Yeah, manuscripts. Yeah.
It kind of feels to me like a similar thing though, because if they're putting out call for submissions, because I remember the last Scooby conference, one of the breakout sessions that I attended, the lady was one of these people who runs an agency, and she's saying things like, she was talking about things that she was looking out for. Oh, I want a book about maybe say dinosaurs and things like that. And it kind of feels to me like that kind of conversation, because if she's asking for that, it's probably coming from the publishers, right? Or not?
Yes and no. So I have definitely, don't get me wrong, I've definitely looked at those manuscript wish lists and go, oh, is there any trends here? If you look at enough of them, you might see a trend. But really often for the agent, it's just personal taste. So I wouldn't necessarily set off on creating a project from something I'd seen on someone's manuscript wish list, when that's because I'm not selling to an agent, right? It's no good to me. The agent is just really into romantasy with I don't know, dragons or something, if that's just their thing, because the agent isn't buying from me. It'd be more interesting if publishers did that, which they don't, right? But what you might do is get it through conversation with a publisher, but it's still very dangerous just to say, right, this publisher has said they love dragons, let me go for it, because publishers are always moving around, and you don't know, the next day an agent could have just sent them a manuscript on dragons, and then you come back 6 months later, hey, remember you said you love dragons, here's a dragon project, and they're like, oh no, sorry, I
6 months ago, right?
Yeah, it's like literally, you know, the day after we had that chat, I bought a dragon project, and I'm like, so I just don't do that.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. So, what would you consider your big break, Jasmine? You've been at this for a while now. I mean, what's your standout moments, or what are your standout moments?
Well, I think definitely selling Aziza.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, selling the first project was massive, and what I always say is, Tola, when she decided that she would write on this series, like Storymix wasn't proven at all, so she was risking her time, right? And I think I paid like such a small advance because I was just starting out and was really skint, so she didn't even do it for the money, right? But I remember having a conversation and her saying, oh, I just really believe in what you're doing, so let's just give it a go. So for me, selling that first project, and we sold that first project, the more than one publisher was interested, you know, it was a real moment of saying, okay, I was right about this business idea. And it was a commitment to 5 books. So again, if you go right back to the beginning about taking up space on the bookshelf, I was like, this works. And then also we'd found Corey. So Corey had done the illustrations in our pitch deck, and Macmillan were like, we love his artwork as well. So this sort of idea that it's Tola and Corey and myself, first project out the gate, it's like your, what do they call it, your MVP, your minimal viable, the thing, it's like the proven concept. So that has got to be a standout moment. For me, was the first project. More recently, we've just sold our first YA project called Oxford Blood, which is a sort of murdery thriller set during Oxford Interview Week. We had a preempt in the States for that. We had an auction in the UK. Again, it was our first YA project, so a good start. So that feels like a standout moment as well. Nice. Future Hero, our series Future Hero. It's interesting you were talking about film rights, like that has been optioned, which is exciting, right? Now, obviously, if that progresses all the way, and if it ever makes it to the screen, that will be a massive standout moment. But we're right at the beginning of that process. So,
are you part of? I'm curious. Are you part of that process? So they option the project. Are you part of the conversation to then get it green lit? Are you part of that? Do you get to engage in that conversation with them, or it's just their thing?
No. So once they've optioned, in the same way that the publishers bought the license, right, and so they get to take it forward to market. If you sold the option, which is why I would interrogate them before selling the option. Right. Once they've bought the option and they've put the material together and they've managed to sell it to Netflix, like the train has left the station, right? So not part of the conversation, but they might invite me to come and talk with the head writer on the series. If they were pitching it to a streamer, they might say, oh, look, meet Storymix where the idea started, hear about their mission statement, and then look at what we've done here. So that might happen. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's fine. Do you have more? Do you want to share more in terms of your career breaks, or you want me to? Because I have more questions here with me, so I just wanted to be sure that you're done before moving ahead.
Have we got what? Well, I just feel like growing the team. I think hiring my first hire was massive. You know, so there's 3 of us who work in the business full time, 3 of us on sort of payroll and salaried roles. So the fact that I've created jobs for people was huge and is huge. And I feel incredibly proud of that. And then all of the writers and illustrators I've worked with, but the writers that have gone on to do extraordinary things. But I was kind of there at the beginning. that, I don't know, I feel like it's been 5 years of lots of highs. It's been tough at points as well, but I feel really proud of what we've built in those 5 years.
Yeah, nice. And in terms of your influences, I mean, what influences you? What keeps you going? What's your driving force? What's behind all of this?
Yeah, certainly in the beginning it was anger. I was so annoyed. That moment in the bookshop with my son was so important. Like in terms of looking at the shelves and going, wow, not a single, this is 2018. So in 2018, it was only 1% of kids' books featured a protagonist, a main character of colour. Like it was less than 1%. That was 2018. So it's improved now. It's still not great, but it's better than 1%. So you've got to remember that's when I started the business. And I was just like, I can't let this stand. Like I have to do something about it. And frankly, I wish I'd done more earlier, but it was the right time for me because I'd actually left working in-house as publisher and was freelancing. Wasn't actually enjoying freelancing a ton. I was doing a lot of celebrity publishing. I found it quite soulless. And so I definitely,
soulless.
Yeah, I did. I have a really unique skill set, right? What am I going to use that for? What change am I going to make? What is my legacy going to be? And I could help celebrities, or I could build something that's meaningful and important. So a lot of things sort of conflated and came together to get me to the point where I was like, right, I'm going to risk. It was risk. It was money. It was reputation. It was all kinds, just to say I'm going to start this thing.
Yeah, interesting. So this is not on my list of questions, but it's just crossed my mind. I mean, especially speaking about representation. So from the point of view of publishers, or from what I have gotten about this country, for example, I know that the issue of representation, it can seem like a checkbox to tick for certain people, maybe because certain things are happening. So the one that comes to mind is the George Floyd thing back in, I think, 2020 or thereabout, because I had attended a conference also then where the speaker talked about the pressure that he was under because certain people wanted to, make you feel like, we're diverse enough or inclusive and things like that. Do you have any thoughts with respect to that? Do you come against things like that? Yeah.
Oh, 100%. I sort of, because it was our 5-year anniversary back in April, I was looking at the statistics of how many businesses are run by women, run by Black women, that just exist after 5 years, right? The numbers are tiny. So it got me really thinking, well, how come I'm here and my business is here, right? If you think about all of the sort of bias and the structural challenges that there are for me to have a publishing business that is here in 5 years' time. And I mean, a big part of me feels that a pandemic needed to happen. And during that pandemic, we watched the murder of a man, right? When we were all raw and vulnerable and thinking about life and what it means to be human, all of that had to happen for Storymix to be here in 5 years' time. And I'll just explain really quickly what I mean by that. So one, as a woman, right? My husband is brilliant. If he's watching this, you're brilliant, right? But I am the primary carer in our household for our kids. And like I said, I had the idea for the business in 2018. At that point, I didn't live in London. So to come in to have meetings with publishers was this epic, honestly, quest. Dropping the kids, getting into London, pitching, trying to get back in time to pick up the kids, all of those things. Once the pandemic happened and we moved to Zoom and Google Meet, it became so much easier for me to be a mother and a business person to pitch my business. Whereas if in 2018 I said, can we jump on Skype and let me pitch you a new project, people would have been like, what? Okay, so that had to happen, a whole shift in how we have meetings and where it's seen as respectable and okay to pitch via a video call, right?
Yeah.
So that had to happen. And then with the murder of George Floyd, publishing had a reckoning. They had this huge epiphany moment, okay, where they were looking at their lists and being like, we haven't done enough, we need to do more. I had that moment in 2018, right? They had that moment in 2020. And so if you were a publishing industry having this moment, they're like, well, how are we going to fix this? And you have a book packager like Storymix who create brilliant stuff. But I always say, when you're starting a business, you're solving a problem, okay? Yep. And I solve a problem for publishers in terms of creating a more diverse fiction list, okay? So I was just there. I had books that I'd been working on that I hadn't got to pitch because we'd gone into a pandemic. So then when the sort of phone is sort of blowing up and people are like, we didn't get to meet in Bologna, I know you had lots of really interesting things to pitch. Can you tell me about it? And I'm like, sure, I am homeschooling. But whilst I'm doing that, guess what? Let's jump on a Zoom call. I'll pitch you our project. So we got off to such a strong start. But look what had to happen for that to be the case.
Yeah. Because my next question is, how sustainable is that run then? Because I mean, these things do fizzle out, I think. Yes. So from your experience, I mean, has that been sustained, or you've had to, I don't know, sort of fan the flames, remind people about 2020 so they can keep.
What I would say is there's definitely a moment, I think, in late 2020, early 21, I could have sneezed on a handkerchief and I could have sold it. And it's really lucky for publishers that what we do is quality. What we do is quality 100%, whether or not it chimed with the zeitgeist, whether it does or doesn't chime with the zeitgeist, what we do is quality. So luckily for them, I didn't sell them a handkerchief that I sneezed on. I sold quality projects, but I would sell everything that I pitched. I had 100% hit rate. That is not the case now. And our projects are as good as they were back then. I would say they might even be getting better because we're 5 years in, right? So, it's definitely that urgency around that conversation isn't the same as it was in 2020. Of course not. No way.
Interesting. But I'm guessing that the way that you found the flames is just keep putting out great works and hopefully
that's all we can do. That's all we can do. And because that other stuff was all stuff outside of our control, that was societal seismic shifts that had nothing to do with what Storymix is or does. So we do the same thing then that we do now, which is great storytelling. It's tougher than it was.
Wow. Interesting. So, Jasmine, I mean, with all of this, though, work-life balance as a mom, author, and businesswoman, what do you do outside of writing or, I don't know, managing writers or illustrators? How do you relax outside of all those?
No, I don't have hobbies. I told you at the beginning, I'm very boring. I don't have hobbies. It's all books. It's terrible. Wow. There's not work-life balance. But I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do better. TV? Yeah, but I have moments, I'm being too honest now. I'll be watching something, I'll be really into it, and I'll be like, yeah, but this person's already kind of got to the level of success where their stuff is on TV. They've had their payday. What I need to make sure that my team, I can keep on paying my team their salary, and the writers that we work with can make a living from writing. So why am I watching this? I should be thinking about what our next big idea is. That is the truth of it.
Okay, so how do you avoid, maybe another way to ask this question is, how do you avoid burnout then?
Yeah, so what I've started doing this year, I don't always stick to it, but on a Friday, I sort of call it an offline Friday. So, and I try and go to, still linked to work, unfortunately or fortunately, depending, but I'll try and go to galleries or talks, or I'll try and do things that are topping me up creatively. and I will take myself away from the screen. But I am still very actively being a sponge, because I always say if you get different inputs, you get different outputs, right? So I might go and watch something at art house cinema in French, something I would never have time to do normally, but just to get my brain in a different space. Might go wandering around a museum or an exhibition and try and make space to do that on a Friday. But it is still because I want to keep topped up creatively.
Yeah. How about vacations, though? I mean, vacations with the family, those count, right? Even if it's
that
3
counts.
times in a year, right? So
Yeah. I just got back from New York, actually, where I was half working, half having a holiday with the family.
Oh, wow.
So,
Half working. Oh, wow. Well, I guess the family's also gotten used to the fact that you're always working then. So I guess it's a win-win for everyone.
Well, and my son knows I started the business for him. So there we go.
Okay, nice, fair enough. And in terms of your affiliations, Jasmine, how do you keep up with, I don't know, any form of knowledge gaps or skill gaps? Do you have affiliations by way of organizations or workshops or mentorships or
That's interesting. No, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of business podcasts, actually. I'm really interested in the conversation around AI at the moment. I'm just listening. I'm just trying to work out what on earth what's going to look like in 2 years' time. And I think the truth is no one knows. But I am trying to educate myself around all of that. But yeah, I'd say a lot of my knowledge comes from podcasts and things like that. I'm not really involved massively in any organizations, if I'm honest.
Okay. Do you have any mentors that you work with?
Yes, actually. One of my mentors was CEO of a company that I worked at back in the day. So he gives lots of advice. Worked with another mentor who's really good at thinking about IP and how you take your IP and make it sort of, how you diversify it, and sort of just challenges me to think about things in different ways. So that is helpful. Yeah.
Wow, it's nice. So you check in with these ones every now and then, or how does that work? Is there a structure around it? Or it's
I say yes, monthly. Try and jump on a call, have an hour or so. Yeah.
Oh, wow, interesting. And do you have people that you mentor also?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I have done in the past, not recently. What we are going to try and do, actually, though, is we're trying to do fundraising to get free books into schools.
Okay.
Because what happened, if I tell, like, the number of emails I get where people like, can I please pick your brains? I really want your advice. Like, that happens a lot. And I will jump on the call with people if I have the capacity. But what I've actually decided is I'm going to charge for that time and then use that money to buy books to go into schools. Okay. So that's my new plan, because I'm like, okay, I get asked to do this a lot. If I'm going to do this, they're clearly gaining something. I feel like I want to get a gain as well, even if the gain is the free books into school. So I'm like, yeah, you can pick my brains. It's going to cost you £25.
Yeah.
So look out for that. I will be. I know it sounds a bit, but I got that idea of a podcast, actually. Okay. Yeah, which is about how do you reframe stuff that sometimes feels difficult. Because if someone sends me a really sort of impassioned email and talking about how they're trying to break through and can they just talk to me because I understand the industry, I can't help but say yes. But I also feel like I want to be able to also, if I'm going to give in that direction, I also want to give in this direction. So
that's value, though. I mean, isn't that what advisory is? I mean, because people pay for advisory services, right? I mean, I have done, even though I'm self-publishing, I've had to do, when I was going to get my book on Amazon, I had a 1-hour session with a lady where she just worked, because she'd done the same thing previously.
And she charged for it, right?
Yeah, she charged for it. And I thought it was, I mean, I gladly paid her because that was me. I mean, I could have gone off and spent hours reading and watching videos, but then she'd gone through the process.
Yeah.
I saw her YouTube videos. I checked out her website, saw that she had a service around that, and I paid. And
and you're happy. But I think because you're a professional, and so you're like, this is an investment in my business and what I'm trying to do. I think I don't know how to describe it, but people are like, can you just read my manuscript? I'm like, no. But can I read your 60,000 word manuscript and give you notes?
Well, that's not
So yeah,
easy.
I do say no to that. I do
Mhm.
say no to that. But I'm like, okay, you want a 20-minute conversation?
Yeah, pay for it.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a question, but I think you might touch on it I think you might touch on it in what the question that I'm going to ask you now, because I was going to ask you this one. So
Yeah.
So your current and future projects, what are you currently working on, and what are your future plans?
So in terms of current projects, I have to be a little bit careful, right?
Mhm.
You never know who's listening. And
Mhm.
until we've pitched it, I don't want someone getting there first. But I can tell you broad areas that we're focusing on. We're
Mhm.
definitely focusing on YA at the moment. And we've
Okay.
got a couple of really cool YA ideas that we're working up. We're also working on a verse novel idea, which I'm super excited about as well.
Mhm.
And then we've also got a graphic novel in development, which I'm very, very excited about.
What was that other one? Verse, or what do you call it?
Verse novel. So verse is, so it's a novel not told in prose. So it might be in sort of poems or poetry, but it's a novel.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're working on that. And then in terms of future plans, it's so interesting. So you sort of touched on a little bit about the market and maybe how the market has got more challenging. And like recently, we've had a couple of projects which we haven't sold. And I've been so heartbroken about it because they're brilliant, brilliant projects. And I'm not just saying that because they're Storymix projects, saying that because it's true. But I haven't been able to sell the license to a publisher. So I am thinking, I'm still on the fence. I might need to go and pay for my own advice and find out how to do this. But working and moving into that sort of self-published space for maybe 1 or 2 books a year and actually publishing that as a Storymix imprint. But I'm still thinking about it. So I might have to you for advice. And you can charge me. There you go.
Okay, we'll see. Okay. So so I thought the question that I thought we were going to touch on this, but you haven't, so I will ask you. And the context for this is when I first met you at the book signing session in London. I can't remember what her name is, but the lady who's I think the owner of the bookshop, I can't remember what her name is now.
I can't remember her name either. Yes. Yeah.
There was mention of projects about, I think, like a writing workshop or something like that. Have you done any of that in the last 3, 4, 5 years?
We went for like a big bit of funding to try and make that happen, which didn't come off, unfortunately. So we did run a pilot of doing creative writing workshops in schools, which was really successful. And then we still do sort of one-off writing workshops, but I wanted to run a sort of writing program, but I do want funding to get that off the ground. So until that happens, I just need to sort of gather myself up again to do another application because grant funding is not easy.
Okay. Yeah. And in terms of, do you have any collaboration wish lists? People that you would want to work with?
Collaborations wish list. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of names that come to mind. Probably not going to say those names again because I don't want people looking my very ideas.
Okay. So Jasmine, where can people find you? I mean, if potentially anyone who would like to work with you, or because is it ever the other way around though? Because I know Storymix, you come up with the ideas, you know the plots. I mean, you have a wonderful team. Is there a chance that it's the other way around, or that it can be the other way around, where someone thinks he has, the next best, I don't know, the next thing after sliced bread, I don't know, the next best of sliced bread, and then then they want to run it by Storymix. Is that even a possibility?
No.
Oh, okay. And you get, but I'm sure you get lots of those, right?
Yeah. And I'll tell you why is I feel like why Storymix works is because we're really, really focused and good at knowing what's going to work. So like our margins are pretty tight. Yeah. So we have to be like so sure that we think we can make it work. And I think that's why we're a packager and not an agent. Like I feel like in terms of the risk appetite of something flying or not flying, I feel like with an agent, with like as an agency, you need to have a bigger risk appetite than I think I have as the founder of this business. So I kind of trust in my knowledge and the knowledge of my team and the ideas and thinking, right, this is where I put the time and effort, and it is a lot of time and it is a lot of effort and a lot of cost to get something off the ground.
Okay. But where can people find you just in case? I don't know, maybe for something else.
Well, they can certainly get in touch if they like the idea of writing to a brief. Not every writer does, and that's okay. That's actually absolutely fine. Like they're like, oh, my favorite bit is coming up with the ideas. Why on earth would I work on a Storymix project? Well, some writers, they're brilliant they've got brilliant voices, but they can't plot for toffee, right? We can help with that. Or it might be a writer who's really known for writing serious issue-based books, but would just love the opportunity to do something funny, right? They could work with us there. We might have a project and then they can try a whole different voice. So they're not being typecast. We might even do that under a pen name and do something completely different. So there's lots of reasons why writers and illustrators might want to work with us. Obviously, when we pitch, we don't pitch the whole manuscript. We're just pitching the sample, right? So again, for most writers, they have to write the whole novel to be able to go out to market. Whereas with us, you only write the first third. So if any of that does sound appealing, you should check out our website, which is storymix.co.uk. And there's lots more information on there. There's also the link to our portal to apply. So we have an application form on there. And our social media handle is Storymix Studio, and that's on Instagram and on Twitter. And if you wanted to check out any of my books as Jasmine Richards author, that's just jasminerichards.com.
Okay, nice. And then do you have any tips for people like myself or other people out there who are looking to follow in your footsteps?
Now, as an author or as a packager?
Well, for me as a businesswoman, as a business person, so
Yeah, what would I say? I'd definitely say about asking for help. So with those places where there's gaps, that is important. Like I definitely know the things that are my strengths and not my strengths. So certainly in terms of mentors and things like that, it's worth being really honest about where you have gaps and try and get that help in. So that's one thing. I do think it's worth sort of trying to plot out your next 3 years and think about where your costs and where your money is going to come from, right? So really eyeball that and be honest. I think for a really long time, I just never costed myself in, right? So I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so profitable, and didn't pay myself a salary for many years. It's only quite recent, right? But now being more honest about our costs for developing projects, I think that's really important. Actually, we have a podcast which sort of gets into this a little bit called Storymix Craft and Conversation.
Okay.
So if people are interested in the business of being an author as well as the craft, you should check that out. That was like a mini series that we did last year. Okay,
nice. I mean, are you going to be revisiting that anytime soon, though?
Yeah, I'd love to. You're doing it, so you know how much work it is.
I know. I have a backlog of interviews that I haven't even processed, but it's good. I mean, you should have. You would have to have something before you can process it. So it's all part of it. So, nice. Well, we have come to the end of the podcast, though. The interview. So thank you very much, Jasmine, for coming on board. I have learned a lot from you, and it's a pleasure meeting you again. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I feel like, who knows, sometimes my mouth can run away with me. But in a good way, I feel like knowledge is power. It's all good.
Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. You can find all the links in the podcast description. Make sure to follow the Creatives Across Borders podcast and stay tuned for the next episode. Until then, bye.